In this video, we'll discuss Jennifer Pan's facial features and how they point to a propensity towards anger and disappointment. On a side note, I apologize for some wind noise in this video, as I didn't notice it until after the recording. Enjoy. Hey everybody, welcome back to another face reading. Today we've got Jennifer Pan. She is the highlight of a documentary called What Jennifer Did. It's currently on Netflix, and it's definitely a sad story, but as I did last week when I read O.J. Simpson, I like to read pathology sometimes. I like to keep things positive, but I do think it's good to look at pathology because face reading should be used in that context. With all that being said, if you were a first-time viewer, please go right up here, watch the 5-minute crash course face reading video, because that will give you an orientation to this process, and it's very important. So don't blow that off. If you're a first-time viewer, just pause this, go watch that, and then come right back, and everything I talk about will make a bit more sense. So, when I watched this documentary, the thing I was brought back to is the assessment of Shen. Shen is the spirit or consciousness of a person. It's the immaterial light that comes out of the face when we are talking to someone or when we're interacting with somebody. It's one of the most intuitive lenses of face reading, also one of the most difficult for most people because it's immaterial. It doesn't have clean, defined edges. It requires an intuitive aptitude to a certain degree to read Shen well. And some people are a bit more intuitive than others, but with that being said, I wanted to look at her features and talk about this, and also give the caveat that I gave in the O.J. Simpson video. You can't look at people's features and say, they have this, therefore they are a narcissist. Or they have these teeth, therefore it explicitly means this one thing. That's not the way face reading works. We want to think about features in terms of looking at what features usually mean in the associated pattern context, and then trying to connect dots. This is not a hard delineated box, put in a box type of topic. It's just not. It never will be. So with that, this lack of clean defined edges, sometimes that's hard for people, but I am going to talk about her features and look at her life terrain, how this unfolded, and things to think about. So first and foremost, let's talk about the features that leap out to me. When I look at Jennifer Pan, she is got some sizable eyebrows. As I've said many times over, the eyebrows are a wood element feature. The wood element relates to the liver and gallbladder system of the body. We have to remember, in the Eastern context, the organs are seen as these energetic matrices that digest thought and emotion. They don't just break down vitamins, minerals, and compounds in our body. They also do that, but you have to think, the way the East looks at it, these organ systems digest thought and emotion. And if we overdigest a certain emotion, those organs can become compromised. We actually lose health. And if we're in a positive state too long, technically, that can cause problems as well. So we want to find this middle ground in terms of human emotions and expression. There's a middle ground we have to find. We need to feel pain, but we can't stay there. We need to feel joy, but we can't always stay there either. So that being said, when we see these big bushy eyebrows, the wood element system on the negative side is going to process things like anger and frustration and irritability. On the positive side, compassion and kindness. So when we see dominant wood features, specifically with her, these big eyebrows, that means that the liver system is usually robust, and there can be a propensity for anger patterns. That's not always the case, but when we see life terrain and theory line up, this is what we're talking about, and this is what we're looking at. So I saw that. I thought propensity for anger, resentment, irritability, volatility, all those things come up when you see these kinds of eyebrows. It at least has to be on your radar if you're face reading. So that's the first thing. She did end up having her parents, she attempted to have both of her parents murdered. And her dad survived. He ends up being one of the guys when he comes out of his coma that identifies her and lets the police know that she was involved. So that being said, the other thing that I notice about her is her mouth. So she's got full lips. This is an earth feature. It relates to the 5 senses, pleasure seeking, and sensitivity and feeling. When we see a big mouth, this is a person typically who feels quite a bit. Now, do all humans feel? Yeah, of course they do. You don't want to think of this as, if I say something like that, like, it relates to feeling, that it means she feels more than the average person. geese are fighting over here. They're at war with one another. In any case, it's not to mean that she feels more than others. It means that that part of her personality is going to be elevated. The sensitivity, the feeling, the need to seek pleasure seeking, that kind of thing is going to be more dominant. And that's the way we want to think about it, right? Everyone can draw a circle. Some can draw a circle better than others. Some people have more of an artistic aptitude than others. So with that mouth, we see sensitivity and feeling, but you've also got these very intense eyebrows. And so when we overlay those principles onto what she did and how her life unfolded, it's interesting. It sounds like she had very controlling, maybe perhaps overbearing parents. And with a person that feels a lot, that burden may have been a bit too much. With those intense eyebrows, we can see these patterns of resentment and anger building up inside of her. So that being said, her mouth also in this picture, her mouth is, the upper lip is slightly larger than the lower lip, and the countenance of her mouth is downturned. And when we see this, okay, these lines that can show up right here, okay, when a person's face is at rest or when they're talking, if we see lines forming here, these are what they call disappointment lines. Now, she doesn't have disappointment lines, but her mouth is trending in that direction of being disappointed. And so when we see that, these are sort of the markers. We want to think that if we see crevices, wrinkles forming on the face, this is a habitual emotional pattern that is being wired into the person either through external forces or by choice, by poor mental habits and poor disciplining of our emotions. We can go down this road. So she has this. Now, outside of her features, which could be read, and it's technically not as concrete as I would like it to be, because you could make these connections with anybody technically. I know what she did, therefore I'm looking at her features and comparing the two. No part of me is trying to be psychic here. But what I noticed was her Shen. This was the thing that leapt out to me. And again, Shen, the spirit or consciousness of a person, is best read face-to-face, in person, when you're watching someone. And we want to think about Shen and how it expresses in terms of congruency. When we're talking about the birth of a child, we should probably see, given that all things went well, joy, happiness, maybe even some tears. My daughter was a home birth. And when I used to talk about it, I would get teary-eyed sometimes because I actually caught her in our dining room, in a water tub. And there's a congruency there. There's an appropriate emotional response to the thing I'm talking about. With her, if you watch this documentary, which I encourage you to do because it's a case study in how the Shen expresses, you can see this. When we lie, when we are talking out of sorts and bending the truth and altering the truth and trying to give a different reality to what actually happened, we're going to see this incongruency. So when she first talks about her parents being attacked and murdered in her home, she's all tears, she's crying. And while it looks a little contrived, technically it's congruent, but it still feels like something is off. But then, as the detectives start probing her and asking her questions, her demeanor starts to shift. It starts to move and undulate, and it also starts to become very clinical, very matter of fact, very clinical in her description of what happened, what went down. The things that didn't add up, she's very smart. You can see her calculating and kind of piecing things together, but her affect on her face begins to change. We also start to see this in terms of when a person is telling the truth, there's this element of fire, the fire element that we have to kind of keep at the forefront. So when we are reading Shen, that's the fire element, okay? The fire element houses 4 different organs: the heart, the small intestine, the pericardium, and something called the sanjiao, which is basically like our endocrine system. The heart regulates 4 organ systems, and that's because the heart is seen as the seat of consciousness. It's where the soul resides in Eastern philosophy. So that being said, when we see this, okay, we see these parameters, we're reading that system, the heart energy. And when a person lies, the fire begins to sputter a little bit. So if a person is telling the truth, the fire element will express a lot like a campfire. It's contained, it moves upward, and it's pleasant to be around. There's a feeling of warmth and comfort that we get from being around someone who's telling the truth and who is expressing their fire element well. However, when we see disruptions in the fire, if that campfire, if we think of like high winds and the flames start to move a lot, and maybe even an ember flies out of the campfire and catches something on fire and starts a forest fire. This is sort of the visual metaphor we want to think about when a person is lying. And as she continues to lie, we see the fire element leave the face and move into the body. I talk about this in some of my videos about truth-telling and how to assess a trustworthiness or the trustworthiness of a person. A person, when they are telling the truth and they're in alignment with their Shen and their spirit and the fire element is firing well, that fire coming out of the face, the anima, the expression, the light is contained. But when a person starts fidgeting and they start self-soothing, which she does a lot, she starts pulling her hair a lot as she lies, we see the fire leaving the face and moving into the body. The body becomes more scattered, and this is sort of a telltale red flag sign that the Shen is not expressing well. The fire is sputtering and flickering and moving, and that's not a great sign. And that's really what I saw when I was watching her talk about the death of her parents, again, which her father survived, luckily. Now, the other interesting part about this is her quote-unquote boyfriend in the flick, or in this documentary. His name was Daniel Wong, and I want you to look at this picture of their faces side by side. Congruency of facial features is something in face reading. It's like attracts like. Oftentimes, people that we get along with, not always, but often, we will find that we have similar facial features, or there's a congruency in how the people are seeing their worlds. Similar facial features means a similar world view to a degree. It means we're going to see things slightly in the same way, and we're also going to be attracted to people sometimes who have similar facial features to us. And when I look at this picture, there is a similarity between their features. Now, mind you, they're both of Asian descent, so of course, culturally, genetically, there's going to be some crossover and connection there. But if you look at their mouth, both full earth mouths, the philtrum, which you can't see as well in this picture on Daniel Wong, but their philtrums, the space here, is pretty similar. The upturned of their nose and how much of the nostrils show, and they both have thick, bushy eyebrows. And in this picture, they actually have a similar affect in the face. And he was involved. He was also lying. He also got in trouble. I forget, I think he went to jail or prison for part of what he did. I don't know if, I can't remember. I don't want to butcher the details of the story, but we see a congruency in their facial features. And so what she was able to propose to this boyfriend, what she was able to elicit and get from him, there is a connection. There's a congruency in how the Shen and those facial features were assessing. So this doesn't mean that people who have the same facial features are going to be killers. Don't think of it like that. Just think who she is, how her face looks. She had a boyfriend who had similar features, and they both worked together. And so this is the thing to keep in mind regarding face reading in general. So again, I really encourage people to watch that documentary simply to have sort of a case study in the expression of Shen in relation to truth-telling, something very relevant to think about. So again, her features kind of point to disappointment with a propensity, given that wood element, that she would need to be mindful of resentment and anger. And so we see these things come together in her face and in her life terrain, and this is something to think about. I was not able to find a fully frontal picture with no shadows that was good enough for an inner persona and a public persona breakdown, so I'm not going to do that. But you want to look at the countenance of a person's face. I can't stress enough how important reading Shen is. The features of a face are very important. They're going to give you clues, but in the end, you have to look at the Shen, that light that animates the features. You have to look underneath and sense, feel, and intuit to really get the inner workings of a person. And you can see this again in her interview when she's being interrogated. Everything starts to fall apart pretty quickly. So that being said, that's my face reading for Jennifer Pan. If you guys have questions, comments, anything like that, please put them in the comment section. And if any of you would like a face reading where we dive into your lifestyle rhythms and we dive into that, please reach out to me. People ask me all the time, do I do face readings? Yes, it's a big, sizable piece of my business is reading faces. And you have to think that if we're doing a face reading, it's nothing like this technically. It's 75 minutes long. It's considerably longer, and we dive into, here's what your features say, and here are the lifestyle rhythms that attune to that and will make you healthier and help you live longer. So I'm not going to do that in this case with her, but this is one lens. This is one way to assess pathology and face reading. So hope you like this reading. Take care.